I want to share a paradigm that is a doorway into perceiving my journey in relationship with these significant events. And the first and perhaps most important part of the paradigm is the mathematics of probability. And all of us exist within a probability field. And statisticians determine for different areas, I guess, what is a big enough sampling to adequately capture the data set. Obviously, if there are certain events that only happen once every 100,000, then you have to have a data set of maybe 500,000, and then you'd see this object happening 5 times within a given probability field. Other things happen 1 in 3, and so if you had if you had a sampling of 20 or more, you'd notice this pattern of every third person. This or that is important. The probability field or the data set for this pattern, most of it is contained in a data set of 270 people. And so if 270 people within the probability field of the Human Awareness Institute in the United States, and of course they are overlapping probability fields, are 100% transparent, then the data set will contain at least 80% of the pattern. And if we look at the fractal nature of consciousness, the fractal nature of reality, the human ego is a microcosm of the group, of the cult. The cult, to a certain extent, is a microcosm of the species. Within this probability field, we have the self, which is a microcosm of the group. To exist in community and develop the neuronal pathways through mirror neurons, to have intimacy, to have connection, to have consciousness within a community. One must consciously or unconsciously, intuitively or verbally, establish a mirror neuronal framework that we relate to in lieu of the actual community. Because the data set of who we are is so very complex that to truly capture it through our senses, it's too big. And so we create an internal model of relating with the group, whichever group that is, the family group. And in that model, it allows predictability. So if you pay close attention to a shame-based family where there are secrets and taboos, for example, if you watch the body language at the dinner table, everyone understands where the secrets are, where the lines are. And you can carefully trace out the terrain. Pink elephant right in this area, everyone's going around it. We don't necessarily know what it is, but there's a pink elephant being moved around there. It's not okay for someone to speak before Dad speaks. You can see the nervousness in everyone's body because someone just broke that rule. Something particularly emotional occurred at that moment, and they involuntarily spoke spontaneously in integrity with themselves, and that broke the rule. And so everyone's shuffling around wondering, is Dad going to throw a knife? Is he going to leave the table? How's he going to take revenge? Because that's the rule. And so what's Dad going to do to punish a 6-year-old child for transgressing some unspoken rule, which of course cannot be articulated? Or will he let it go because it's the youngest and she's too dumb to grasp all the unspoken rules at the table? And so you have this mirror neuronal map of the system or probability field in which you are a part. Maybe Dad only flies off the handle 9 times out of 10. But if one of his Playboy magazines arrive once a month, if it's that day, there's a 80% chance, that the eruption will not occur. But 9 times out of 10 it will. And so you develop that kind of quick memory, and it's even unconscious. It's like, oh, package arrived, maybe we're okay today, or whatever the pattern is. And of course it cannot be talked about. It can't even be talked about that what's in the package, or that there's a correlation, because all of that is against the rule. And if you don't want to be violently traumatized, you have to learn this map as a survival coping mechanism. This is your map to relative safety by knowing stuff. So you've got your little map. And the map, of course, lives inside of us in the fractal nature of the human ego. We define ourselves in relationship with the largest mass. And mass is a very important principle because particularly growing up, we experience ourselves as little. And we experience the god and goddess of parent as giants, the people around us as giants. They have voices that terrify us. They have objects that can kill us. They have rages that we can't integrate into our body. And so the question becomes, how do we relate without coming head to head with the established patterns of mass? So just like a 2-year-old, discovering the world, they discover that when they hit this ball, it rolls away because they have the mass. But when they run into a sharp glass coffee table, the gash is in them. The coffee table didn't move with a 2-year-old body, but they're in pain. And so they understand, I have to work around that which is bigger than me. And this is, of course, not a moralistic map. It is a map of mass. And this is, of course, a very big distinction, because that which is bigger than a child, which is bigger than us in psychological shapes, in social shapes, in power structures, in physical objects, has nothing to do with the intelligence of the mass. It has to do with the size of the mass. And so if you want to survive physical reality, you have to make a difference between a 100-year-old redwood tree to drive your car right into and a branch that's this thick and will move out of the way. Because you can drive into the branch with the law of mass, and the branch will snap, and you'll drive through. The 100-year-old redwood, not so much. It's going to be left standing there with a few bark gashes. Your car will be totaled, and you may be through the windshield into a tree, which is going to crack your skull. You're not going to crack the tree. And this fundamental reality of mass, is something we have to grapple with in order to survive. If we don't grasp that concept, we're dead. And there are physical masses, which of course in the 2, 3, and 4s and stuff, usually by 5 years old, other than fast-moving objects, there's some general awareness of math. And, oh my gosh, I was about to fall off a cliff. And I can't do that because, when I hit the rock and stuff down, I'm going to be hurt. And I know that because when I fall just 3 feet, the floor is massive, meaning it doesn't just bounce, it hurts. And so I've got to attune myself to the largest mass in my environment. And as little people, these are not, physical objects are easy because they always do the same thing, and they don't do it personally. A table doesn't bang you and not bang Dad. Dad has to respect the table as well. It may not bash as deeply if his body is 5 times bigger, but it's going to have a consistent impact. And survival, in many ways, in our meeting of our hierarchy of human needs, to survive and to be secure in survival. We don't survive and feel secure in survival until we develop a map of navigating in relationship with mass that works. And this is critical. It's not just develop a map. It has to work. Because the reptilian brainstem that feels threatened in our survival, that narrows the focus down to fight, flight, or freeze, is going to engage and be active as the dominant voice in our world until we have a map that allows us to mitigate traumatic levels of pain. And so this map is, of course, much more urgent. It's often considered the speed of childhood. When you've got a power structure, when you are surrounded by masses in the form of parents and a culture that actually understands children, that loves children enough to understand them, enough to attune to them, enough to develop competence, enough to, with that competence, create safety and pleasure and well-being for the child. The child does not need, in that environment, to develop a very sophisticated map initially. They can just do what the parent tells them to do in the terrain, in the environment that the parent says is a safe environment. And if that environment is built with the understanding of children, that there needs to be some adventure, there needs to be some mystery, there needs to be this, etc., and that environment reflects a statistically safe probability field. Yes, maybe 1 in 1,000 kids is going to fall out of a tree climbing the tree. But we're not talking about, toxic waste dumps where everyone's going to dip their toe in and they're all going to get poisoned. Obviously, not a map developed with competency or understanding. And so, but when there is a sociopathic element, and this is done when there is an absence of love leading to an absence of competency within both the self and the child, there is a violent degree of pain that escalates very rapidly for the child because the same pains emerging in the incompetence of the parent are experienced at 500% greater intensity by the child because they're 5 times smaller and because they lack power in the environment. In a capitalist cult where most things pivot around money, meaning where you can buy just about anything if you have enough money, and a child has no money, there's no agency. In a country of law, We're not talking about a country of children or a country of human beings, a country of law, where the law comes ahead of the well-being of the person. And we take, of course, great pride in saying, this is the law, and it will be applied. We're not quite as interested in whether the law is intelligent. And to measure the intelligence of a law, you have to assess the well-being that is impacted by all involved as a result of following the law. So if 80% of the people involved's well-being goes down at great expense, and there was an easier alternative in which everyone's well-being improved, it is a form of stupidity or hostility as opposed to a law that is anything to boast about. But just the fact that we are a court or a country of law rather than a court or a country of human well-being defines the things that come before the empathic relationship to another human being. So a capitalist culture says that we protect money and we protect the flows and the freedoms of money. We have to have a free market. Notice we're not talking about the freedom of human beings. Now, obviously, in a cult that honors money, those who create a lot of it have more freedom than others, and we're okay with that. Because the focus is on the capital. Again, we are a capitalist country, not a human country. And so human beings don't matter in many of our metrics. GDP, for example, is at record highs, while 70% of the people in this record high economy are struggling to pay bills. Now, if money as a bottom line cultural output is the most important thing, this is great news. If human beings are the most important things, this is obviously not very good news at all. 70% of people feeling shame in a culture that measures the value of their money more than the value of their humanity, and as a result is delighted at this hyper-concentration of wealth, because the wealth is there, it's just being concentrated in a smaller and smaller sliver of the population, which means that if we measure well-being over the last 50 years, we will see a number of areas of it going down. But if you measure GDP, you see a number of areas where it's going up, because it's polarizing more and more. The net is higher, but the polarization is dramatically higher. And so it's, it depends a lot on what you measure. The map that we develop to navigate around the mass, in this case the mass of our government, the mass of the group, the mass of the economic system, the mass of cultural shame, because within a terrain of taboos, there are certain things that are shameful because they're on the other side of the taboo. And in a culture of shame, shame is the act of exclusion and disowning. To judge and to shame is to say, that's not me, that's you, and it's bad, it's unspeakable, it's something to be pushed out of the circle, which in the hierarchy of human needs puts you back into below survival, because when you're a capitalist, your well-being isn't protected, your money is protected, and if you have enough, you can buy well-being with the money. You can buy a house to rent. If you have money, you can buy an attorney. If you have money, you can buy a doctor if you have money. And so you can secure your survival in a capitalist country by doing whatever it takes to create money, of course. And this single difference in hierarchy, that the golden egg, money, is more valuable than the golden goose, people, is the basis for the insecurity in the rat race that so many Americans feel, despite having this high GDP. There's so much insecurity, because if I know that I don't have value, my money has value. And if I know that everyone's trying to take my money, and that nobody wants to give me money because they're giving me some of their value, some of their survival, so they're trying to hang on to it, then I'm in a certain amount of opposition in every single interaction, where I'm trying to spend as little money as possible and get as much, and everyone else is trying to do that with me. And so there's this tension to compete for that which is presumed to be more valuable than a human being. And if you're generous and feeling, transcendent in that moment, and okay, here's my money, there's a little bit of surprise and grab and this and that, and then suddenly you're a worthless human being. Why should I give you a home or a house or something? I don't care about you. I care about your money, and you don't have it. So off on the street you go. And so these everything that's bigger than us becomes something we need to develop a map around, to navigate in order to survive, in order to feel secure in that survival. Security consists of the map that allows us to predict one, what things are bigger than us, and two, what will happen if we interact in different ways with that which is bigger than us. And within a sociopathic environment where the child rushes to develop this, their focus is purely panic, traumatic survival. And so their focus is all on that which is bigger than them. Because when you're rushing out of infancy in traumatic pain to desperately try and figure out who's, in a good way of putting this, whose ass do I have to kiss in order to have the violation, the sociopathic behavior shift to someone other than me, where I won't be the butt. And in a dysfunctional power structure, in a sociopathic power structure, which is a traumatic power structure, meaning every single person who is in a traumatic state, one, without imminent relief and care, so a chronic traumatic state, everyone who is in a chronic traumatic state, and in a culture such as ours, those numbers exceed 80%, where that state comes to the forefront, because obviously if we're playing with our dog, we're not really afraid of all the fears we have, etc., playing with our dog. But as soon as a business adversary or someone who could shed light on the truth that will get us in trouble, when certain aspects of our truth will put us in opposition with large masses, then the truth becomes the enemy of survival for someone in a coping mechanism, because it's like, don't you dare tell Dad that I drank his wine. Because it's not about, we're not talking about esoterics or philosophy or so on. If Dad knows I drank his wine, last time I broke 3 ribs after the beating, he could kill me this time. So I've got to get you to lie with me so that I can survive. And so in a sociopathic power structure, that is dysfunctional, first of all, truth, which is a highly functional form of mathematics, because it's more efficient. You can do more with truth with empathic human beings than you can ever do with lies, and you can do it with less energy, a lot less energy. Honest transparency is a potentiator for empathic, intelligent human beings to create 100 times more abundance in human needs, safety, value, etc., with the same data that they had where they don't know anything, where everyone's wearing a mask and stuff. And so transparency is an incredibly sophisticated form of mathematics, but only with empathy. Transparency in a sociopathic environment is used as the basis for targeting pain. Because in a sociopathic environment, the parent doesn't care what the needs of the child are. They are so consumed in the self-absorption of meeting their own needs in a sociopathic environment that the child is a pawn to be moved around with superior mass to facilitate the parent's survival. And so this is obviously not a context in which to have children. If you are in such a sociopathic cult that your own survival and security is regularly on the edge, in that state it induces the reptilian brainstem, and one steers into the child and away from the other grown-up, not because the child is guilty, but because of the law of mass. If a parent hits a child, the child goes flying. If a parent hits a redwood, their hand hurts. If a parent lashes out at their government for abuses of power, they feel helpless, futile, and frustrated and all that. If a parent lashes out at the child for that helpless feeling, they feel satisfied because the child is screaming and demonstrating that they have impact, which is one of the things that violence is reaching for. It's saying, do I have any impact at all? Violence is always corresponds with a certain level of powerlessness. In a corrupt dictatorship, etc., if you complain, you disappear. It's very difficult to have a sense like, gee, I have agency here. So this sense of chronic helplessness and oppression and depression and nothing I do matters and nobody values me, etc., is a very toxic medicine, because if you believe it too deeply, you just curl up and die. Why on earth would you invest in a life that has no value, no agency, that is pointless and is bound to end in suffering? Why not just drink it away right now? Why not shoot yourself in the way that more Americans are committing suicide than dying in car accidents? And many of them are 50-year-old white men that realize that they're never going to have the feeling of well-being in this cult that they want. They don't have relational skills. They don't have well-being skills. They are emotionally illiterate. They're traumatically illiterate. 1 in 7 is an addict, and they are not being celebrated or found use for in any way. They're being treated as garbage in many ways, and they don't know how to fight that cult. And so, it's just get it over with. If you give up and you believe in your own helplessness, it's a short end and of a very painful and lonely life. And so the violence towards something smaller, of course, because the helplessness comes from pushing against something bigger that doesn't yield. The violence to something smaller is a medicinal shortcut to say, oh, I have some value. I may not be a value I'm proud of, but at least I can bully something smaller than me and not always be endlessly bullied. And so if there is violence present, it is a fractal pattern. There's always helplessness on the other side in a sociopathic environment, because it's not really fun. It's not really fun to bully or love. What's fun is bullying rather than feeling helpless. So if you've got helplessness on the one hand or a cheap shot of power on the other hand, the one's more fun. If you've got safety, love, and belonging on the one hand available to you, and you know how to engage with it, you're competent in that domain, it's no fun to bully. It's miserable. But it's just slightly better than feeling completely powerless and worthless. And so you can extrapolate the fractal pattern of the environment psychologically, and psychologically is an important thing, because once we create these maps, we often project them out into the world. We don't really teach children in our culture to be adults. We teach them to go insane, because having wrapped up a toxic map of sociopathic engagement into the infant's mind and said, you learn this map and it'll keep you alive, and it does, because they figure out how to get away, like how to make sure the other sibling gets the beating and they don't. And that's how they survived in a sociopathic environment. And so they figured that out. And then of course we dump them in school, which keeps them emotionally illiterate and relationally illiterate and traumatically illiterate. And the teachers are terrified of intersecting in any way with the parental abuse dynamics. And that in and of itself is an abuse, because when a little person understands that their teacher is angry with them for telling them about the childhood abuse, because it's risking the teacher's job, because the teacher has a sociopathic principle that doesn't give a shit about childhood abuse. The teacher has to worry about her own job, and so if the parent who's abusing that child finds out that there's a teacher trying to advocate for the child rather than enable the abuse of the parent, that parent is going to take revenge on that teacher. And if they have a sociopathic principle, they will succeed. Or they may they may not have a sociopath. They may set the teacher up, plant drug. They can do a lot of different things when you're in fight, flight, survival, in the sociopathic brainstem. And then, of course, you arrive out into the business world where you discover that everyone loves you and is trying to look out for you, etc. Or do you find that you were hazed and set up to fail by the other employees as the initiatory, joke, and then you're given the job that you're least capable? Or if you go to the military, Edward Snowden writes about his military experience, and the military thought it was really great to ruin his shins by pairing him, the smallest person in the boot camp, with the largest person. So when of course the large person had to carry Edward, he just ran along. It was nothing. It was a little towel all around him. But when Edward had to run or be shamed with the largest guy on his back, and he's the smallest guy in the troop, his shins powdered, basically. And in a sociopathic environment, you take the hit. You are viewed as worthless if you get sick. So they set you up to fail. If you fail, then they'll punish you some more. So, of course, you're not going to transcend the sociopathic survival coping mechanisms that way. Or getting into the workplace, or when you discover the other sociopaths that people have met called people in the dating arena that have absolutely no interest at all in the humanity of the other person. They just want to, that's the look I want. Now you behave this way and make me look good and I'll date you, otherwise I'm getting rid of you. And I'm certainly not going to waste time explaining feelings and all that. Grow up, and I've dumped you because I found something better. When sociopaths are in the dating arena, you're not going to, of course, transcend the pattern either. But without any initiatory dynamic, you're going to use the pattern. The more sociopathically you are surrounded by objects, you're going to use the pattern you learned in the survival map of childhood to relate to everything else, and the world becomes the projected family. which isn't totally off base, because the world created the actual family. Meaning your parents growing up in a completely different culture would have been completely different parents. They would have spoken another language. They would have had different default mode options. Certain things would have been more okay. Certain things would have been less okay. You would have been better off, worse off. If your parents came from a different culture, if your family came from a different culture, you would be completely different. And I remember really grasping this when I saw an Aussie in a Thai's body kite surfing, because I'd spent enough time in Thailand to know that women don't like swimming in Thailand. It's not culturally sanctioned. Of course, if they were American, they'd all be swimming. So I really see the influence of culture when you can take the most beautiful tropical waters in the world, relatively speaking, and convince half the population not to enjoy them, just because your cult says, oh, that's not a woman's thing to do. And even swimming for sport isn't a terribly Thai thing to do for the men either. I mean, fishing, obviously, and so those, but it's not really. And so here's this young Thai woman kite surfing. And I said, why are you kite surfing? I wanted to know why the rule was being broken. It wasn't my rule, but it was obviously a rule in place. And she answered in an Australian accent. And I said, what's the story? And she said, well, when I was 1 year old, I was sent to Australia. And so I've been raised in Australia. And she was completely dismissive of the Thai women. What idiots they are, not enjoying the water, a little bit of fun. So she was an Aussie because she'd been raised in Australia. And in Australia, in a relatively tough, large expanse of land, a lot of your measurement is your endurance in your battle with the elephants. So it's do a lot of work, be very innovative, and don't complain and say it was no biggie. And that makes you a good Australian, because that is a cult that will, when you're really doing farming and outback work and stuff like that, help you survive. Now that it's industrialized city, it's pretty irrelevant, but navigating thousands of miles of desert and stuff, you don't want, an idiot who can't remember the water bottle and says, oh, Daddy, can we go home? And you die of starvation. You want someone that's got it, got something with it, thinks for themselves, is a bit independent. And so they train it into the cult. And so if your parents were raised here or here or here, they would be different. So your parents are a fractal representation of at least a subset of the cult. And very often within a family, there will be, if you take 30 people in the family, there'll be some person that's rich, and if it's a snobbish rich cult, then there'll often be a snobbish rich person. There'll be a shameful, we don't talk about this person. There'll be a scapegoat. There'll be, the cult will be represented in the family system. And so if you use the map that let you survive in your family, it's better odds than none that it'll let you survive in the cult in which your family was produced. And so you have that dynamic. Now, within any system, to the degree that it is getting more and more out of balance, it is getting more toxic, and there will be more and more pain. And so one way of measuring intelligence is in the leadership in a cult. How symmetrical is it? Does it ensure the survival, security, love and belonging, sense of self-esteem, development of personal potential and gifts, bringing those out into the world and moving beyond self to live a legacy, to leave a legacy, to in some way serve something bigger than oneself, to move through Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, which every human being in the history of humankind has instinctively moved towards, or consciously moved towards in more intelligent cultures, to move through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How symmetrically is that done? Are the needs of the heart, mind, and body being served by the cult? To the degree that one gets way out of whack with another, and in the United States, the body is served or poisoned, depending on how you look at sugaring up and doping up a body, or fussing about a body, and the brain is deluged with often arcane information. When's the last time you used algebra? And emphasized as this big gem of cult hierarchical value. And the emotions, you'll go through the entire cult repertoire without a single hour of competent emotional literacy. So in the heart, mind, body, you see the asymmetry. You have depressed, miserable children in a school that is ignoring their depression, their misery, etc., that isn't teaching teachers what the children actually need them to teach. Their children are suicidal, doped up, depressed, lonely, humiliated, and in abuse dynamics. So obviously a competent culture would teach emotional literacy, relational literacy, biology of the body, healthy nutrition, and you would engage socially to create a very high resonance that would make them highly interested in learning things, because they would be aware that they had intelligent leadership. Intelligent leadership responds to what is. When you've got a classroom of miserable people and not one adult in that school is responding to the misery, by willfully ignoring the topics that address that, and is instead cramming the child with things like algebra, which the child is vaguely aware even at that age, they're never going to use that in their entire life. It's like, oh yes, you too can become what? Lady Gaga, whatever, if you learn your algebra. You too can study doctored history and learn how to, dominate and invade other people and feel good about it, simply by calling the people inferior that you kill. This is wonderful skills for a world of growth and liberty. And so, of course, the children feel pain and hostile because, of course, they feel invisible. Because we have the data that says how depressed, suicidal, miserable, phobic, this and that our teenage students are. And we have the data that we have not taught a single topic in school that would address any of that. And we haven't taught our parents any of that, which means we've condemned the statistical probability of high school to be misery and hell for the majority of our people. And one can measure the intelligence of the power structure, or of the cult, which is the height of the power structure, by the amount of energy that it spends to create either well-being or suffering. So at the bottom of the rung in stupidity and ignorance is you spend a tremendous amount of money, natural resources, and time to make people incredibly miserable with very low odds of them getting out of it. So there you've got complete incompetence. And an intelligent cult is you spend very little time, money, and energy to create very high levels of sustainable well-being. That means that the vast majority of people are sustainably mastering the art of excellence, of competence, of love, of well-being in a symmetrical way. So you look at the symmetry. In the fractal pattern of the universe, you look at the sphere of the Earth. Why is the Earth spherical? It is the most graceful shape for an orbit. It could be square. It would just take a lot more energy. And it would be a lot more harsh. The weather would be harsher with a square rather than a rounded planet. The heat, because the heat volatility, you'd crest an edge of a square, and then suddenly, you'd go from complete blackness to bursting heat, which means high volatility in temperature changes, which means high volatility in winds, which means tornadoes and stuff. So the sphere actually is an incredibly graceful shape, and it is the most symmetrical shape in the universe. It is also the polarity and the paradox of the feminine and the masculine, because the sphere is the one. You can look at a sphere and you can say it's one. But if you try and create a sphere in language or with computers or geometry, you create a sphere out of an infinite number of dots. The dot, the individual, being the masculine expression, the one, the species, being the circle, being the feminine expression, or the line being the masculine, the circle being the feminine. You create a sphere in computers by refracting an infinite number of lines, or the human eye can't grasp much more over 1,000 or so points, and so you decide how much mathematical lines you're going to use to create and shape the sphere. Even when they cut, using our technology, if they cut crystal spheres, for example, they'll cut a big square, and then they'll cut off the corners, and then they'll cut off the corners, and they'll cut off the corners, and they just keep cutting off the edges. But they're doing it with straight blades. And, and then once they get to the point where you can't quite feel it, then they start polishing it and stuff. But we create a sphere out of an infinite number of lines. So it's the paradox. It's the one in the infinite, the masculine and the feminine. It is the single most graceful shape in the universe because it takes less energy to transport a sphere than any other thing. That's why we use wheels. We tried square wheels. We tried triangular wheels. We tried octagonal wheels, and somehow the sphere was the one that we settled on. And trains and all that. It's the most energy efficient shape. So the most energy efficient and intelligent culture is responsive empathically to its people in their needs to climb the hierarchy of human needs, but it is also more energy efficient. I consider Thailand to be vastly superior to the United States in intelligence because on an average level income of $300 a month, I don't see homeless people in Thailand. I have to come back to the fifth wealthiest county in the United States, Marin County, to see homelessness. And they do it with less effort. See, the United States creates 1,000 laws that drive up the cost of housing. And then when the average cost of a home is 1.1 or 1.2 million, and then, 10% of our population, surprise, surprise, can't afford that. I know, let's just put them on the street. You see, Thailand doesn't create those 1,000 laws to begin with, graceful. They just let people get on with their lives. And then they don't come around and offer free housing because they can stick up a bedroom for $600 on a weekend because their government isn't interfering. So surprise, surprise, they're housed. They don't spend governmental energy dictating how the Thai live. And then they don't spend governmental energy rescuing or punishing the Thai for not following the rules. So it's incredibly free. I'm literally 1,000% freer as a human being in all kinds of ways when I'm in Thailand at 40% of the cost. So if I want to jump off and go hang gliding in Thailand or paragliding, I jump off and go hang gliding. But here it's like, you have to drive 3 hours and you have to get this license and this license, for your well-being. In Thailand, they just let idiots die. If you want to race around drunk and drive off a cliff, they do all the time. It's incredibly efficient. Because there's not all this, this structure. And at the same time, they have beautiful temples for anyone that, wants to transcend and live a more beautiful life there every couple of miles. And they're really fun, and the Thai have a good time in their temples as opposed to putting on the guilt face or whatever, and shuffling into their darkened cathedral to be reminded that some boy died a few thousand years ago for their benefit. So you see ranges in culture. $300 a month. Smiling is up 800%. Courtesy is up 500%. Homelessness, I can't see it. Construction, innovation, there's just the complexity of the food. It's magnificent. The quality of the food, magnificent. The freedom of its people, it's just so beautiful in so many ways. But that's how you measure the intelligence of a cult. How much energy in time, money, and natural resources does it take to either create your population to be lonely, depressed, addicted, miserable, etc., versus very happy, healthy, contributing human beings? Because when you hit that point in your hierarchy of needs, where you develop your human potential and your gifts, and you bring those into the community, you've just raised someone that exponentially contributes to the value, to the quality of life of the whole community. But we have this phenomena within the psyche. We give our power to certain personas, often the adaptive personality in childhood, that help us survive. And so, for example, if the person who told the truth the most at the family got slapped and beaten and put up and blah, 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 and was generally hated, then we develop an adaptive personality. It's authentic to tell the truth because it's easy. It's the most efficient thing. But if you're in a pathological environment, the adaptive personality has to lie effectively. Well, if the adaptive personality is the only one between you and being beaten, the ego, in fear, prioritizes the adaptive personality and says, you run the show here. I would tell them the truth and I'd be hit. I don't want that. You go and be the one that protects the self. And so they are elected. Persona within the self are elected to engage in the environment based on the survival template, which is determined by the family, which is determined by the cult. And the ranking of the intelligence of that cult, of that individual, that family, is determined by how symmetrical and mathematically intelligent that is. You could think of an electrician. A good electrician will have all your devices running with minimal power consumption, and they will run for a long time. A crappy electrician takes 10 times the power, burns down the house, half the things break all the time, and you have to replace them. And they're shorting stuff out. They're consuming electricity, lighting fires. That's an incompetent electrician. And an incompetent parent or leader takes these dynamic energies that are in the system and empowers rapid growth within the system. An incompetent leader destroys the potential of that growth for fear of being alone often. The stuck incompetent person in prison in shame, etc., is often most worried that anyone else will make them look bad and get ahead, and they will sabotage. I had to move out of my family home at 17, and the primary motivation was I knew that my father would take great delight in destroying my business, and that the children in the family who had been raised to be violating, because that's what happens when you have parents that don't have boundaries and container, that I could not start a business in my house because they would have to ring the phone line, and I couldn't get my own phone line at age 17, and so I had to leave the house and move to a house where I could leave a message on the answering machine and know that people would be polite to my clients, and that's, there's plenty of people in that position that understand that their parents would consciously or unconsciously destroy their future at a moment's notice, but they don't have a place to go. And so we give, as a cult, our power, our vote, our money. Taxation is forced money giving to a power structure. If you don't give the money, you will be destroyed socially, financially, stuck in prison, whatever. So give us your money or we will destroy your lives. And it has to go here. And give us your, you do what we say or we will destroy your lives. The child's, dynamic that you do what we say. Because we said so, not because it's intelligent. Heaven forbid we have to define exactly why we're doing what we're doing, but, you do that. And so we have this fractal pattern at all scales of human interactions where we give individual power to the cult. Now, there's something very noble and beautiful about this because we have a broader possibility field. In the mathematics that define a possibility or a probability field, the more concentrated power there is, the more mass there is, which means, for example, one person is never going to build an aqueduct. But 1,000 people, if they want to, will build an aqueduct. And so if the world is engaged purely as individuals, aqueducts will not exist. Because if everyone's doing exactly what they feel like, whenever they feel like, with their money and stuff, 1,000 people never randomly just feel like building an aqueduct. It takes a concentration of leadership and power and money and natural resources to exponentially expand the possibility field, the probability field. Roads are a great example. An individual is never going to build an interstate highway system. They might build a road where they want to go, and then someone else builds a road where they want to go, and then there's all these half-done, crappy roads. So it takes organization. And so we have this fractal pattern where there's always a promise. And the mathematical promise of concentrated mass, concentrated energy, is that with intelligent leadership, that will release exponentially the potential of the individual. And that's the promise. You give us your time, you give us your money, you give us your natural resources, and we will do so much better for the country, the economy, the whatever, than you would do if you all had your own money and stuff. And so you give it to us, and we will help you advance your life. This is the promise of government. At any level, it's the promise of the parent. At some level, if we grant a child to the parent, the promise is you're supposed to raise that child and do what's good for that child. Now, we know you're not going to do that because the statistics don't support it, but you're going to do what's good for that child. And then you get the right to raise the child and have the power. You have the legal, the financial. In this cult, you have all the power as the parent. And we're not going to even check on you. We could send out a weekly census from the government to the children saying, identify yourself with Iris, do this, it's just an app, it's free, and then tell us how you're doing. How's your heart rate going? Put on a little monitor. How's your this? What are your dreams? Are they all filled with terror, this, that, the other? What's causing you pain in your life? And we could do that weekly for free, or we could do it monthly. We could actually take note of how our children are feeling around the country. And the horror, of course, of letting this information come out by, some of our abusive parents. We can't have this. We've got all the, we're looking good because we're controlling the data. We're not letting the data get out because we don't want to have to learn competent parenting at this age or whatever. We're busy surviving and all this stuff. We just don't want anyone to know what's going wrong in our household. Because of the shame, because we're in a punishment culture where if anyone found out, they'd all just hate us, and then we wouldn't survive, because that's what incompetent cultures do. But you have the movement towards mass power structure. Now, once the movement is concentrated, and of course when taxes are being formed, there's all kinds of promises. We would never use your tax money to spy on you and lie to you and interrupt your travel plans and delay your passport by 2 months because we couldn't be bothered to send out a bit of paper when you need to fly, or we never do this. We're going to take all this money and time and legal authority for your benefit. Give us this power for your benefit. And mathematically, it's neutral. It's the possibility expands positively and negatively with synergized resources. And we are pack mammalian species. This is in our DNA. We understand that the monkey that decides to be a hermit is the monkey the jaguar picks off. So be normal, fit in, don't be a hermit, is jaguar talk. It's monkey talk. Don't go too far outside the circle. Do what everyone else is doing. Everyone else is loaning crappy mortgages. Go ahead and do it. It's fine. Just stay with the herd. Because if you're in a herd, your odds are very low. If you're in a pack of 100 monkeys, sure, one of them is going to be eaten tonight or in the next few days. We're being hunted. But it's only 1 in 100. It's me. If I'm off in the hermitage, off there, I don't get the alerts. People aren't grooming me. I'm not getting the ticks removed, by friend. I'm getting sicker. I can't sleep as much. I'm more vigilant because no one's on the watch. Whereas in a pack, so there's all this burden comes down to the individual. And it's, of course, the burden that is collapsing onto the hyper-individualized American psyche. The world gets more and more complex, and it's all about you. Go make something of your life in a world where upward mobility is crescendoing down with forces that have little, to do with your. Be upwardly mobile and free and happy, and so there's this deep intuitive knowing that if we're belong to the pack, that's one of the reasons why love and belonging anchors security of survival. If you're in a cult, and you will have people make sacrifices for your well-being, that's called love and belonging. That's called competence. That's called survival and security. If people will fight and protect your survival, your security of survival goes up abundantfold, and it feels good. It feels good. It helps you build self-esteem. I must be valuable. These people give a damn about my well-being. And in a sociopathic culture, you experience extraordinary amounts of pain, and no one bats an eyelid. No one moves an inch. And you realize I'm not worth moving an inch to this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. My goodness, my survival is not secured. The reptilian brain kicks in. We have a more sociopathic culture. Within a sociopathic culture, you always think as an individual in combat, because the individual is in combat with its environment in a sociopathic culture. And so the reptilian fight, flight, freeze, no empathy. There's no room for empathy in fight, flight, freeze, because in a sociopathic culture, empathy will get you killed. Empathy for the person who isn't going to steer out of the way and is going to hit you, because they're not empathizing with you. You've got an asymmetry. And it's one of the reasons why in sociopathic cultures, the individual reduces to the lowest common denominator. Because if you're in a high common denominator where you empathize with the people who would kill you in an instant, you are dead. Because you open yourself up to care about them. And that's the opening. They say, oh, good, I can rob your house now. It's wonderful, And so this is very difficult to shift. It's very difficult to shift because one thief in a group of 100 has everyone locking up their belongings. If one person at the party discovers that another person at the party, and they don't know who it is, stole a car, Now everyone at the party has to go lock their car, look at this, they have to be reduced to the lowest common denominator because the cost of losing a car is a big deal in a cult that depends on cars to get everywhere and stuff. Now, once the power is concentrated in a dualistic system, or a system of the greatest good for the greatest number, there is always a shadow, meaning the government is never going to do what's best for you all of the time. There are going to be, in broad sweeping policies, someone wants to build a high, when Moses decided he was going to build the interstate highway system in New York and all of that, he had what he had was dirt on a lot of politicians and stuff like that, and a lot of budget and stuff like that. And so he had the ability to just run roughshod over neighborhoods. And he used that thing. He evicted thousands of people. He cut up neighborhoods. He destroyed neighborhoods in order to build these very large road structures. And he wasn't an elected official, and he had this fiefdom for years. He could just say, I'll get that done, and he could do it. And so when you have, and of course there's some benefit to having these large sweeping roads, but as we've learned in later science, the more roads you build in America, the faster they fill up. And so you don't get any reduction in traffic jam in that model. And so, there's more traffic jams today than there was 50 years ago. And there's, dozens and dozens of times more roads. They're just all clogged up. And so it doesn't actually work. And so we're entering a new paradigm. But the point is, it's not black or white. Your government will do some good things, do some bad things. Your parents will do some good things. They will do some bad things. Your parents may even, in a sociopathic state, accidentally do something really good for you because it was easy for them. It was more expedient to do something good for you in that moment than it was to ruin your life. So you got a bonus that day. And so you have the mass power structure. So when the mass power structure uses that power, when your parents, when your school, when your boss, when your government, when your local government, when your group, when your therapist, when your doctor, when your hospital, when the group that has been given a high concentration of influence uses its power to support your needs, which is a cycle of love. You love enough to care, you care enough to see, you see enough to understand, you understand enough to empathize, you empathize enough to attune, get data, get a feedback loop going, you attune enough to succeed, you succeed enough to create abundance of well-being, to release that synergistic possibility field on the upside of the mathematics of combination. And in succeeding, you create abundance. In abundance, you create safety. You create a sense of gratitude. You create a sense of love, which is the synergy. People feel loved and they feel great when you have the competence to create a reality with them of safety, of abundance, of pleasure, of vitality, of choice and freedom. Love is a given. It's this synergy of the gratitude and the joy and the safety and the pleasure and the trust and the intimacy. It goes both ways. That's the cycle of love into competency. And so when the power structure uses your money, your resources, your land, your freedom, your vote, and all that, to create synergy and growth, what you have is transformation and rapid growth. You have a very sustainable I mean, obviously, a competent culture doesn't destroy the environment for the next 50 generations so that three rich bastards can add an extra 10 million to the bottom line that year. I mean, that's not terribly intelligent or competent or loving, etc. But no, you think about your environment, which means your environment is more sustainable. You look more holistically at a whole bunch of things. You measure what matters to your people. You get metadata constantly from your people, which is completely available to us now in the form of apps. I mean, how many of us would take 5 minutes a week to let the field know how we're doing in the field and how the field could adapt to synergize with us better, to release more of our value to the community and to bring more of the community value to us. That's what synergy is. If 5% answers to questionnaire on an app, going out to all the neighborhood, to the local officials, to the state officials, to the national officials, and if that led to leadership by people who gave a damn, it's one of the reasons I'm encouraged to hear Andrew Yang talking about mathematics. In his presidential bid, he actually loves enough to be competent or make an attempt and then measure the results. When you deal with math, you get to see how you do. And when you love enough to care, that's, of course, a good thing because you're not trying to look good, you're trying to get better. So you need feedback loops. You need to know, okay, we just spent $1 trillion to bail out the bankers. Let's have a survey, America. Who's feeling better after that $1 trillion was spent? I see, okay. How about $1 trillion to give each of you $1,000 for the next 5 months? Who's feeling better now? A better result there. That's Yang's approach. And so you have synergy, you have growth. And with growth and synergy comes trust, which brings trust, a sense of safety, which reduces defenses. And one of the big differences between a country like Denmark and a country like the United States is Denmark puts all of its money into its people. The United States puts a large chunk, more than the next 25 countries combined, into defense, which is based on the belief that the world is our enemy and that we've got to fight to be alive. Well, when you put 25 times more than any other country into killing people and tools for killing people faster, you don't have as much money to invest in free education or free health care or free paid maternity leave or free housing for the homeless or job retraining to jobs you're more passionate about. Well, that was the interesting statistic I discovered in Denmark. 400% higher quality of life for the average Danish person. They all love their country. They all love their taxes. They trusted their government because their government used their money to make all of their lives better. Their government paid them $1,000 a month to go to college, to make going to college less easy, so they didn't have to get part-time jobs. While in college, they could really study college. And that's the Danish system. Pay your people $1,000 a month to go to free college so you have no college debt. Sounds good to me. Would I rather an extra nuclear stockpile or free education for my people? There's where the intelligence factor comes in. And it's, of course, worth noting that intelligence raises with the brain stem or the brain level that's operating. The reptilian brain, it would put it all in defense. The limbic brain, maybe half of it in defense, because limbic brain is just raw emotion. It's not until you get visionary reason in the frontal cortex, etc., that you start actually caring about human beings and feeling like your best safety is to be friends. If you're friends in an abundant reality, there is no need to descend into the reptilian state. If you're in scarcity, in a sociopathic reality, empathy will get you killed. The environment determines which parts of the self will survive. And the psyche, the ego, adjusts accordingly. And those are the presenting personas of a cult that mirror the presenting personas of the government or the group. So you see synergy and growth when power is used to support needs. When power is used to destroy needs, for example, when my government takes the most important relationship to my health, my life, and my finances, and arbitrarily says that under no condition can she enter the country for a year, and then another year, and the government costs me, in order to maintain that relationship, $200,000 in time off work, laying off people, elevated levels of PTSD, elevated levels of stress. So when my government takes my money to deny access to my house for the most important person on the planet, you see a sociopathic betrayal of the group's well-being. And the degree to which a government does that is the degree to which it is corrupted. And what is corrupted? The promise. The promise is we give you all this money, this time, this resource, etc., and you will use all of that to make my life better. But you see, if the United States government didn't exist, and I had all that tax money, she would have been in my country, in my house, in one day, because it was important to my well-being, and it was important to her well-being. Because of the mirage of laws enacted by my leaders on the promise that this is good for my well-being, the most important person in my life, I could meet them in almost every country around the world except my own. Well, that's fucked up. When your business is here and you can't work over there, etc., etc. That's fucked up. That's a betrayal. Now, when you destroy human needs, in other words, my government was using my tax money and authority to destroy my sense of love and belonging, destroy my sense of self-esteem and mattering, destroy my sense of survival and security with my money, in a framework where if I don't want to pay that money, I can just go to jail and be labeled a criminal and lose all my freedoms. Pretty sociopathic. To the degree that a government destroys human needs, or any power structure, a parent, a group, the Human Awareness Institute, to the degree that a place uses their power to destroy the human needs of the people they are feeding on. The government feeds on us. It's a system. It pays salaries and legal rights and this and that and the other, and constantly takes money and time and hassle filling out forms. When the government uses that feeding to destroy human needs, you have evil. You know, in the anagram or whatever, live and evil, they're spelled backward. You don't have growth, you don't have synergy. You have an implosion. You have a tug of war. Because similarly, when energy, one of the other kind of ways to look at intelligence, is in a polarity, good and bad, up and down, whatever, in a polarity, left and right. We walk, we're bipedal, so we lean hard on the right, and then when we're just about to fall down, we put the left foot in front and we lean hard on that. And the faster we do that, we move forward. And we partner in polarity, and we move forward. Now, the opposite is a tug of war. That's when you consume vast amounts of energy to fight something else with vast amounts of energy, and you go absolutely nowhere. That's a tug of war. And that gets also back to the law of mass. You don't generally try and have tug of wars with something that's dramatically bigger than you. Unless you want to lose or don't understand the mathematics. But when you destroy human needs, you create evil, the opposite. You create pain. Pain is just a little bell that says, hey, hey, something's going in the wrong direction for your well-being. That's pain's purpose. Hey, hey, there's an opioid epidemic. Maybe something should be done about it. It's an alert system that is designed to re-stimulate an examination of the behavior that's creating the pain. And it, of course, leads to destruction, and it also leads to violence and revolution, because a sociopathic power structure, by definition, is more interested in its own survival than it is in its people's well-being. When you have a Nixon breaking into the Democratic Party to do this and that, when you have a Trump bribing another official with aid money to dig up dirt on the other party, it's not for the good of the country. It's for me hanging on to my power. So by definition, a corrupted sociopathic power structure is going to put their own survival ahead of the well-being of its people, which means that as the pain gets louder as a result of policies created by a corrupt power structure, they polarize and move towards one another. And the people say, stop hurting us with these fucked up policies. And the government says, we didn't do anything wrong, we're not doing anything, we're not doing it, we've got to survive, But if survival means lies and protecting the special interests and this and that and the other, the change won't happen. So the pain, the abuse of power will continue. And the pain will escalate. This leads to revolution. The king of Bhutan was fought in his decree to turn Bhutan into a democracy. Why? Because he was a good king. They didn't want a democracy. They wanted their king. Because he used his power to create an economy of happiness, the only country on the planet to do so. Well, whatever the power structure, a king, a democracy, or whatever, that's not the pivot point. The pivot point on whether you have growth, synergy, and value and all that is whether the power structure is corrupted or not. Whether they fulfill their promise to always put the people first in every possible way as fast as possible and use that energy in the same way they would use if it was their own money, and to really own their people. That's fulfilling the promise of every power structure. Because no legitimate power structure says, give me your money, your time, your resources, or we will kill you. And what we're going to do with your money, your time, and land and all that is we're going to fuck up your life so that my life gets better. The revolution in France, they were having big arguments over gardens. Let's have more poor people pay for more grandiose palaces for the king, not for the people, of course. The king can't possibly sleep in more than one room, but let's just keep taxing the people. So that's corrupted power. So you have a revolution. You have the guillotine. If the power structure is too sociopathic to put its people first and is using concentrated power to harm the people they've made the promise to protect, you have revolution. And it can be peaceful, as in someone resigns when it becomes obvious there will be conflict or whatever, or it can be bloody war. Because there's no other choice for growth. Because if the majority gives their power to a minority, and the minority uses that power to fuck up their lives through superior mass and protect themselves at the expense of the people, for life to continue, the power structure must be destroyed, because the power structure as it is designed is the antithesis of life, is the antithesis of growth. So you have violence, disaffection, a whole spectrum. Obviously, the one end is guillotine and hangings and that's it with the old. And on the other hand, you have political shame and resignation, or not in a democracy, you have, not getting the vote. You don't get voted back if your people believe you used the power you gave them to fuck up their lives and not do what's optimal. And so democracy is better at ensuring that chronically rotten people don't stay in as long, though Hitler was democratically elected, relative to dictatorship. But you can have kings. The old Thai king, revered by his people because of all the many things that king did to bring Thailand into the present time. The new king is not respected at all because he's a playboy that squanders money and is interested in his own ego. So you have good kings and bad kings. You have good democratic leaders. You have good therapists and bad therapists. You have good parents and bad parents. But really, it's a continuum. You're not going to get perfection because we're not sophisticated. We don't even employ the basic measuring data gathering devices. Like, why weren't our children the very first people to get an app to communicate their health and safety in this country? Is $100,000 too much to spend to have accurate data about the well-being of every child in this country and have anthropologists and sociologists and government people working on mitigating trauma? Is that really too much, $100,000? It is in a corrupt power structure because children can't vote, so they get no interest. Why would anyone trying to get elected rather than help people focus on children? They can't vote. The parents can. Let's not piss them off by revealing their stupidity. Let's just sacrifice another generation. That's the tyranny of democracy, when it's defined that a child can't vote. Now, we have the self. Now, we're getting a little bit into metaphysics, but this is actually the most important part of this terrain, in my opinion. You have the self, and the self gives a part of itself. There's nothing but self to give. We give a part of our time, a part of our attention, a part of our money, a part of our body exposure. We put a part of ourself into a probability field. Now, this is depending on how you define the probability field, that could be an interaction. You go on a date. And so you put a certain part of yourself into the probability field of the date. Now, if you meet at Starbucks in a busy room and you meet smoking and drinking coffee, there's a different probability field than if you meet in a park and go for a walk holding hands in silence and then slowly share important things about your lives. Both are dates, they just have a very different probability field associated with them. Anytime we are a part of anything, we put ourselves into the probability field of that recipe. You mix up a few eggs, pour in some milk, a little bit of flour, hot pan with oil, pour it in. Most of the time you get pancakes. That's what generally happens when you combine those things in those ways. You get pancakes. Now, if you don't like pancakes, or you're obese and are aware of the connection between excessive carbohydrate intake in this country and obesity, and so you like pancakes, but you're putting on weight as you eat them all the time, with sugar as well, and so then you have a probability field. If you're eating pancakes all the time, you become statistically likely to be more obese than if you're eating salads and fresh organic meat. Salads and meat without carbohydrates, statistically, you're going to go down. Or salads and beans, or whatever it is, as opposed to sugar and starch in refined levels on a chronic basis. So you enter a probability field. Now, a few people have very high metabolism, so they get out. And in psychological probability fields, certain events hit some personas and knock them down. And certain events, the same event, hits another persona, it's not phased. For example, the adaptive personality in a sociopathic household is not phased by injustice. That's a given. What they're interested in and what's affected them is if they got it wrong. The adaptive personality that was expecting this person to get hit and take the fall for breaking this taboo because we're dealing with, sociopathic dad or sociopathic mom here. If that person doesn't get hit when expected, and they get hit or their ally got hit, this is a traumatic event for the adaptive personality, because the adaptive personality exists to survive in a sociopathic environment by predicting accurately and manipulating in order to survive the environment. So that's a traumatic event. But someone lying, that's factored in. The adaptive personality is expecting this lie to be made and is expecting this result to come when this person is, lies in this way, and then that person is going to lie in that way, and then this will be the result, because that's what generally happens 9 times out of 10 in this system. So the adaptive personality doesn't feel hurt about the lie. They're counting on it. It's part of their survival. They're in a sociopathic state. The inner child that sees the goodness, the innocence, the beauty again being raped, being violated to protect the adaptive personalities of this part and this part and this part, that part is devastated. And the adaptive personality says, get out of here, I don't have time for you. I'm tracking the game here. A sociopath emerges in the child at the level necessary to deal with the sociopaths in the power structure, because the hierarchy of human needs says that survival is the first need and security and survival is the next, and those aren't secure until you can survive. And being right or being true has no meaning in a sociopathic power structure. It's, do you have leverage? Do you have leverage or do you have mass? In a political system, for example, Unity of Marin has been blocking my talk on homelessness in Marin County. Tim Little, and I've read a little bit, and there's been some financial controversy, and he seems to be a little bit of a power broker. And homelessness doesn't really fit in with his ministry. And in fact, if people ended up volunteering or giving some money, maybe they would not have as much money for his salary or some, heaven forbid. And so he's been doing that. But if I bring his emails to the attention of the board of directors, he's suddenly very interested, because that now we're dealing with his survival as opposed to the homeless people's survival, which, of course, is a much more chronic state than a cushy minister in a cushy church in a wealthy part of the United States. Survival isn't a big deal there. We're definitely, way above the threshold of basic needs and all that. Nevertheless, the adaptive personality understands what the goal is. He just needs to look good, and he's not confident you're going to make him look good. I see. Screw the homeless people, but are we going to make him look bad, or are we going to make him look good? Because that will get movement within a corrupt power structure. And obviously that's very sad to the essential self, to the soul, to the sense of that comes in with this grace of truth. The possibility field of the species operating from the transcendent region of the brain is so beautiful, is so magnificent, that to the soul there's a great sadness. that possibility field has to be crushed down to an actuality field that is possible with reptiles interacting with reptiles, with the reptilian brain using fight, flight, and freeze to engage with other reptilian brains, because the traumatic level in the environment has taken the empathy brain offline as too dangerous. That is a great sadness, because at the highest level of truth, we are already there. The highest mathematical field, which is the most well-being for the least amount of effort, already exists and is destined to exist out of sheer mathematics. Pain is a warning bell that things go wrong. Now, obviously, if we don't listen and go down and don't listen more and go down, it gets louder and louder. And then we listen one day and we turn around and we go back on course. Back on course where? Back to symmetry, back to intelligence, back to spending less energy to create more well-being and decreasing those areas where we spend high energy to create less well-being. So that's what we do when the pain gets too loud. And it gets too loud for everyone at some point. And we change. And then we learn. And then we don't do it again. Or maybe we do it again and we learn again and don't. Eventually, the system is designed so that the species wins, so that reality wins, so that our ecological framework wins. The whole design is inching us towards, there's nowhere else to go than excellence. Now, we can take some very circuitous routes with time and free will and all that, but it is a law that a competent human being which has agency and mastery will always choose spending less energy and having more fun than having more misery and spending more energy. That's the law. That is human nature. We want to feel good and we don't want to feel bad. Now, sometimes there are big trade-off points within the time framework, etc., where, like, I could steal this and then I wouldn't have to check out. But we don't think it through. We don't think the mathematics through. We don't think about the fact that if everyone's stealing stuff and then they have to put in security and then they put in eye scans, now we have to carry ID cards around, all because we were expedient. So we're looking at sustainable well-being. The real mathematics says that if I always tell you the truth and I always pay for this, you won't even have to have a cash register. Now we can free up cash registers to be chanting, to be dancing, to be making our culture beautiful, because we can count on the intelligence of our people, to have the long view. In our Native American history, to think 7 generations into the future. That's the long view. And you end up intelligent when you take the long view. You end up sociopathic when you use a mathematical fractal that looking at just one moment in time that is incredibly cheap. Oh, I think I'll have sex with my wife's best friend. That's a great way to spend the afternoon. Oh, no doubt the adrenaline will go up. No doubt the endorphins will feel wonderful. And then my entire life will implode in one way or another, and I start building lies and blah, blah, blah. And it's of course, an act of stupidity. But it depends on the frame of reference. Depends on the frame of reference, which is why vision and sustainability. You don't have sustainable relationships where you cheat on your best friend. It just doesn't work that way. You don't have sustainable lakes where you pour poison into them. Doesn't work that way either. So we're talking about vision, and part of the problem with trauma in the reptilian brainstem is it reduces the human being to fight, flight, and freeze in narrow myopic thinking, which induces catastrophic behavior for the long term in order to survive the moment. Well, we're living the reality of that, and we will go into as much pain as we insist on going into. But pain will be there as a teacher. And at some point, the most stubborn, idiotic, terrified, and ignorant among us will get to a pain level where they learn. Learn what? To not create that pain again. And pivot around. Or the people around them will get tired of watching them suffer and will say, hey, stop doing that. Do this. We want to have people happy around us, and that's not going to work. I've done that, and I've read this book, and here, come on. Stop doing that. I don't want to watch you suffer. It's boring. Get on here. So revolution is essential when concentrated power is in a self-protective mode and acting out of integrity with the promise to use this power granted to us and its responsibility to put the happiness and well-being of our people as number one. That's the promise, and that's the journey from love to competency and back to love. Now, we put ourselves into probability fields in every event, and every event has a mathematical equation. We call it reality. Combine this and this, pancakes, that's real, right? Well, it's just as real, or certainly more interesting, how did you get the pancake? What went into that pancake? Well, so-and-so had to grow some wheat. Well, why is wheat so dumb? Did you know that wheat accounts for 50% of all cavities? I asked my dentist, I said, I used to have 1 or 2 cavities every single year. I've got those kind of teeth. Now I don't. And she said, well, have you changed your diet recently? And I said, well, I learned I had a gluten allergy, so I don't eat any wheat. I eat rye. I make pancakes out of rye. I eat rye bread, etc. And she said, oh, well, there you have it. She said, wheat is particularly acidic. So by deleting wheat out of your diet, of course your dental cavities have gone down by 50%. It's like, you're my dentist. I've had plenty of dentists. You all knew that if I deleted wheat, I'd have saved thousands of dollars on cavities? Do poor people know that all they have to do to reduce their dental bills 50% is stop eating wheat? Who's communicating this stuff? Well, how was the dentist going to make more money if everyone knew how to cut down their cavities? So I had to discover it on my own. Now, you get a reality. You get 1 to 2 cavities a year eating all the starch you eat in wheat. You get 1 cavity every 3 years, so a huge reduction, if all the starch is done in rye. So that's your probability field. And for some people it would be more and some a little less, but you figure out what impact a set of behaviors have. And this is the math of the probability field. We put part of ourselves into a reality, into an event, and it spits out a probability field. It is the feedback loop called reality. Dense, hard stuff that says, this is what happens when you do this. This is what happens when 100 people do this. This is what happens when no one in this group does this. Good to know. Why? So you can respond. That's where your power is. Let's see. I want my cavities to go down. No more wheat. Let me tell my friends. I don't want all my kids charging medical bills. So we're all going to eat rye in this family. And we're going to take the $1,000 a year and save dental costs. We're going to go on a vacation. It's more fun than going to the dentist. Don't you agree? Let's eat rye. And so these mathematical formulas are incredibly important. They're teachers. The event is the teacher. The math is the formula. Now, we put ourselves into an event, and then we live the experiment. We are, there's nothing else out there but us to put in our attention, our consciousness. So we move into the event. We move into the event, and it becomes real for us. That becomes us. We live the experiment. That's our lives. And some experiments, we went on this date and we felt terrified and humiliated and didn't want to date for the next 6 years. Okay, that was that. That's what that did. Going into a date, emotionally illiterate, in a shame-based culture, not knowing how to pick a date, going to the wrong place. That's what happened there. No more dating for 6 years. So we create the reality, and it's a mathematical probability field. Now, once we become the reality, we think, this is me. I am this. This is my life. This is me. I'm stuck here, and I don't know how to get out. You see, 6 plus 7 plus 8 times 10 equals 210. I don't necessarily know the math behind getting here. Like, why is this happening? This is the remonstrance of an uneducated child. Why is this happening? No one is teaching the correlation. Or if they're teaching the correlation, many times cults are a few decades behind. So, for example, now if you're told to go to college and rack up student debt, there isn't a lot of jobs waiting for you on the other side in many fields. But the debt has doubled. The law protecting the corporations loaning the debts have gotten stricter for the students, so that many people are burdened now for 40 years with student debt. And the jobs are not necessarily there. But it used to be true in the 60s. In the 60s, that was the truth, and that was a good map. If you wanted your child to increase the odds of upward mobility and all that, go to college. Now, if you want to increase the odds of going to debt, send your kid to college. It's particularly an expensive one because the quality has gone down in some areas and the costs have doubled and the debt laws have become more restricted. So you too can fuck up your child's life by encouraging them to do that. Or it's statistically just more significant. There's still maybe 10, 20% of the people going on and paying off all that debt and all that. There's just a lot of more people that are ending up in debt. So it's not a friendly thing to do. Here's how you can ruin your child's life. Well, let's just do it because that's what everyone else is doing. That was true 40 years ago, so let's not think. That's, again, Andrew Yang, make America think harder. We don't want to think. What do we want to do that for? Let's have another potato chip. So 6, 7, 8, you get 210 reality. That's reality, and it's all me. I went through that. I felt that. I felt this. I'm here. My body feels this. And it's telling us about the numbers. Now, of course, we're in complicated versions of reality. We co-create them. When you have a therapist doing this and a client doing this, and in this culture, you add all that up together, and bing, you get PTSD and rage and terror. Oh my goodness, that's what those numbers add up to most of the time. Well, that's not a very good thing to do, is it? And so we identify with the ego, with the self. But here's why I take so much time spelling out the mathematics of an event that caused more suffering than any other combination of events in my life. The event of being sexually molested by a therapist and then having that be covered up by the Human Awareness Institute. And understanding that I was in a dynamic where they had all the mass. They had the psychological mass because they were 4 of my past therapists and all of my facilitators. They had the psychological mass because through the combination of the psychedelic session and the dynamics of a therapeutic relationship, we define the therapeutic role as you tell the therapist everything most vulnerable about you, and they sit and take notes and don't say anything about themselves. So there's an imbalance in vulnerability in the therapeutic paradigm. So that creates mass. That means what you bring to a therapist are the things that you have a hard time loving in yourself. That's what you bring to a therapist. And you bring them to the therapist so that they can say that that's worth loving. and teach you how to love the parts of you that your cult hasn't taught you to love, has not loved, has hated. And so you don't know how to love it. And so the deal is you give that vulnerability to the therapist where it's like, I don't know if I can love this part of me. It seems so horrible and I'm afraid I'm a bad person, all this. And the therapist is supposed to bring you into the data set and say, well, that's the math of your family. You see, when a father beats the oldest child, and then whenever the eldest child fights back at the father, he beats him harder and adds more punishment and humiliation. The eldest child realizes that they're helpless, they're screwed, because if they defend themselves, they get abused more, and if they don't defend themselves, they still get abused. And that's intolerable. So what does that child do? Okay, well, that child statistically is going to vent the helplessness and frustration they feel on someone smaller than them, the dog, the cat, the younger sibling, the sensitive one in school. That's the psychology. Now, the fact that we live in a sociopathic cult that doesn't bother to educate teachers or parents or children about this has nothing to do with you. So you don't like who you became in a sociopathic environment. And I don't like it either. But what I really don't like is that this country gave your parents unilateral freedom to do that to you, and there are very few protocols in the interest of the child. And this isn't going to change. This isn't going to change until we have leaders that actually care enough to see at school and at home and neighbors that actually can recognize traumatic symptoms and actually put the child first. Because if you were put first, you would never have bullied those children. And so it is ugly and it is painful to see and hear about the way you vented your frustration and blah, blah, blah. But it's even more sick. You were 6 years old. What's sick is that we have a culture of children, grown-up children, who would rather put that in the past than introduce emotional literacy into school. We have a cult that is so dumb, we don't know how dumb we are. And we're afraid of being found out in a shame cult. And so we're passing the buck rather than doing what we can to fix this. That's what really makes me mad. Because the mathematics of mass say that if you are bullied, and you didn't have really much, you didn't really, and this, here we get into the sickness of the metaphysics. You chose your parents, and so obviously, I've yet to meet the person who remembered that, but of course in metaphysical environments you hear that. Your teenage kid being abused, why did you choose those parents? I don't actually recall making that choice. And if I could make it again, theoretically, again, I don't see that choice available to me, but if I could, I wouldn't. That's not me. That may be some fucked up dude up there who's got some plan. I never got the plan, I'm just hurting about being abused. And so we're in these realities. And when we're in these realities with superior mass, and this is the real crux of the thing, where we're in incredibly painful realities, because that's the probability field that happens when you combine these parts of self with these parts of self in this way, within this paradigm, within these beliefs, within this time frame, with this set of behavior, in this environment, these legal structures. It produces this. This is it. Here. This is what's being produced. How can I get out in a cult that doesn't want to talk about it? How can I get out in a cult that will punish me for bringing this up at the party? How do I get out? And the mathematics of the situation, a certain part of us has been invested. And when we're dealing with trauma, a large part of us is engaged in the equation that's coming up with this number. This is the nature of trauma. When the number gets so big, when it's such a big part of reality, it floods. And this is all you can see. You lose track of time, you lose track of space, you're overwhelmed. You have to reset. It's hard to focus. When that's what's going on, we're dissociated. When superior mass is hitting us and hitting us again, how do we escape the vortex that sucked us into this equation called this reality? How do we get out in an environment that doesn't want to deal with the issue?